If there is a colder place than a cemetery in late winter, it is the space between a mother and her sons when they have decided she no longer counts. I learned that truth the morning I buried my husband. 45 years of marriage came down to a single moment of reaching, my hand for the polished edge of his casket, and my eldest, Julian, sliding in front of me like a stranger on a subway platform, one palm out, the other holding his wife's hand as if they were defending something precious from a thief. "You've had your moment, Mom," he said. The words were tidy, efficient, like a memo that closes a meeting no one enjoyed. I didn't argue. Losing a husband is a hole that opens beneath your feet. Arguing only makes you fall faster. But there's a kind of ache that spills out anyway. My vision blurred, and I saw the pastor's lips moving without hearing a sound. Someone pressed a tissue into my palm. I remember thinking how soft it was. Silly, isn't it? To notice softness at a graveside. Leo, my younger one, didn't meet my eyes. He stood 3 feet away, shoulders squared, jaw set, like a man bracing for rain he swears will never come. His wife, Megan, leaned toward him and whispered something that tugged the corner of his mouth into a private smile. Jessica, married to Julian, took a long look at me, then looked away with a sigh so theatrical it should have had stage lighting. Grief can be loud. Wails, sobs, prayers caught in the throat. Mine that day was quiet. It lived in the small, humiliating mechanics. The way your knees tremble on damp grass, the way you pretend your breath isn't quickening. There is a peculiar cruelty in being told to step back from the last communion with the person who held your hand through first mortgages and fevers and bad news printed on crisp hospital paper. Cruelty is the right word. I won't dress it in kinder cloth. In the hours after the burial, people dropped by the house in gentle waves, neighbors with casserole dishes and condolences balanced like fragile china. They spoke of my husband as men are praised in death. Sturdy, upstanding, a fair man. He was all those things and something else, too. Perceptive in the small ways that save a family or save the part of it still worth saving. In the last months of his illness, when the light from the bedroom window pooled over pill bottles and a calendar marked with appointments, he had watched our sons with a gaze I didn't want to understand. "They've changed, Elle," he told me one night, his voice thin but steady. "Listen not to what they say, but to what they want." I told him he was tired. Pain makes anyone suspicious, but I heard the way our boys said later when I suggested family dinner. I saw the way they made room for me in their schedules only when the conversation began with a number, a check for the short week at Leo's business, a bridge loan, so Jessica and Julian could hold onto a house that had already outgrown them. When you love your children, you translate their needs into opportunities to be needed. You learn to mistake dependence for closeness. The night after the funeral, I returned to a house that suddenly felt like a too-big coat, heavy at the shoulders and useless at the wrists. I stood in the kitchen where I once taught 2 small boys the difference between teaspoons and tablespoons, and thought of all the ways time folds life into itself, how tiny shoes under a table can become adult footsteps leaving down a hallway. I brewed tea I didn't drink. I rehearsed words I wouldn't say. A week later, the lawyer called Mr. Albright, an old friend of my husband, with a voice that always sounded as if it were holding a warm cup. "Eleanor," he said, "it's time to read the will." Wills are strange documents. They gather a life into paragraphs and assign value to the things that can be sold. They do not speak of the evenings a man sat up with a feverish child, or the way his handwriting slanted more as his hands grew weak. But sometimes, if you are lucky, or if you are married to a man who believed in kindness without gullibility, the paper says what the heart had been too polite to say while it was beating. I dressed carefully that morning, not out of vanity, but out of respect. Black suit, pearl earrings from our 20th anniversary. There is armor in certain clothes. They remind the world that you have lived long enough to own yourself. I arrived 5 minutes early, the way I used to for school recitals and dentist appointments, foolishly believing punctuality could protect what I loved. They were already there. Julian, handsome in the way men are when money has polished their edges. Leo, eyes darting toward the door every time it opened, as if expecting a parade. Jessica in a dress that read aspiration more than taste. Megan standing slightly behind Leo, as if obedience could make her invisible. No one stood to greet me. Jessica made a small show of checking her watch. Megan scrolled her phone. "This meeting," Julian said to the room, but really to me, "is for the heirs named in the will." I didn't answer. There are conversations that end more cleanly when the other person breaks their own heart with the sound of their voice. I sat, and I placed a plain folder on the table. My hands didn't shake. I think I expected them to. But there is a steadiness that comes after a line has been crossed. You stop trying to keep the room from tipping. You let it. "Mr." Albright began with the formalities, dates, witnesses, the sort of language that reminds you law is a series of doors, each needing its own key. Julian passed him an envelope, the corners already softened from being handled. "Dad showed us this," he said, as though brandishing a photograph from a childhood vacation. "This is the will." He was right in a way. It was a will. It was also a performance. My husband had kept it on his desk, exactly where he knew it would be found, exactly where sons with eager hands would go looking. It divided everything in equal parts: house, accounts, small investments that were not small at all. It was tidy, efficient, like a memo that closes a meeting no one enjoyed. "Excuse me," I said, when the room began to swell with the quiet satisfaction of people who suspect they've won. "There's been a mistake." I slid the folder to the lawyer. He understood before he opened it. He had been present on the afternoon that mattered, the one with the notary's pen and a man whose mind was troubled only by the way his sons had learned to measure love in expected returns. The moment between paper and truth is a thin one. You can almost hear it tear. I watched Julian's smile flatten. I watched Leo lean forward without knowing why. I watched Jessica's fingers tense around the strap of her purse. I watched Megan lift her chin as if to sniff the air. "Mr." Albright breathed out. "This will," he said, "is the most recent and therefore controlling document. There are sentences that move furniture in a room. That one rearranged everything." Jessica spoke first. "This is manipulation," she said, as if the word could build a bridge back to the old map. "He was sick." "We were there," Leo added, but his voice had mislaid its certainty. "You were," I said softly, "when you needed to be. I won't tell you I felt triumphant. The movies teach us to cherish those moments, to applaud the clean snap of justice. But I felt mostly tired of carrying love like a ledger, tired of proving grief was not a performance. I looked at my sons, these men I had fed and disciplined and hugged and forgiven, and I felt something truer than relief. I felt the first cool breeze of a boundary. Outside, the day had decided to be bright, as if the sun were stubbornly refusing all nuance. I remember thinking how odd it is that weather never attends our tragedies with proper decorum. Inside, the room took on the hush of a church. My husband had left a letter. It sat in a sealed envelope, my name written in the slanted hand I knew as well as my own breath. We would open it, but not yet. There is a moment at the start of any real change where you don't know whether you're losing your life or finding it. Sitting there, with the folder closed under the lawyer's hand, and my sons standing at the edge of a cliff they had carved themselves, I understood what my husband had done. He had given me back something I'd traded away in installments over decades, my right to be more than what was left over after everyone else had taken their share. What happens next, people will say, as if the will is the whole story. It isn't. The story is what happens when a woman remembers she is not a waiting room. It starts, I suppose, with a cemetery and a sentence, "You've had your moment, Mom," and continues with a door opening on a smaller, kinder place no one can lock again. We will get there. For now, remember this. Love asks much of us, but not our dignity. Not that. Not ever. A week after the funeral, I learned that silence can be heavier than any shout. My sons did not call, not even to ask if I'd eaten, if I'd slept, if I could walk through the house without breaking in half. I wandered room to room like a trespasser in my own life, touching furniture that still held my husband's shadow. The air smelled of medicine, faint and stubborn, and I could still see the mark his head had left on the pillow. Grief, they say, comes in waves. Mine came as tides, one moment calm, the next pulling me under. But beneath the grief was something more bitter, betrayal. Not just the betrayal of children who refuse to hold their mother's hand at a grave, but the betrayal of memory itself. I would close my eyes and see them as boys. Julian chasing fireflies in the backyard, Leo crying when the ice cream truck passed him by. I had given them everything I could, a childhood stitched together with sacrifice. Now they had sewn me out of their adult lives, as if I were a patch that no longer matched the fabric. It was then that I remembered a secret my husband had left me, a truth folded carefully in a manila folder, hidden from the greedy eyes he no longer trusted. A second will. Not a draft, not a copy, but the real document, notarized and signed when he knew time was thinning. He had shown it to me in the quiet of a late evening, the two of us sitting at the kitchen table where decades earlier we'd once whispered about overdue bills and science fair projects. "They won't see you, Elle," he told me, his hand covering mine. "Not the way I do. They see what you hold, not who you are. This is to protect you." I argued with him. I said our boys would come around, that illness makes people act strange, that we couldn't lose faith in our own children. But his eyes, those same eyes that had watched over me for 45 years, saw deeper than my hope. He knew what I had refused to admit, that the sons we raised with bedtime stories and scraped knees had become men who measured affection in bank balances. The day of the will reading arrived. I dressed with intention as though each thread of my clothing were a piece of armor. Black suit, sharp as resolve. Pearl earrings, small but steady, a reminder of the anniversaries that mattered more than any inheritance. I wanted my sons to see me not as someone fragile, but as someone they had underestimated. When I entered the lawyer's office, I could feel the tension before I saw their faces. Julian lounged in his chair, feigning ease, his wife Jessica perched beside him with the poise of a woman already spending money she didn't own. Leo sat a little stiffer, Megan whispering something into his ear that curled his lips into a grin. They looked at me the way poker players look at an opponent who has already folded, dismissive, secure in their imagined victory. The lawyer, Mr. Albright, an old friend of my husband, adjusted his glasses and gave me a glance heavy with quiet compassion. He began with the envelope Julian had provided, the will that split everything between the sons. Jessica's hand tightened around Julian's. Megan leaned back with the satisfaction of someone smelling roses. That's when I leaned forward. "Excuse me, Mr. Albright," I said. My voice did not quiver. "There has been a mistake." The folder slid across the table with a soft scrape, but the sound landed like thunder. I watched my sons' faces drain, color leaving them as quickly as warmth leaves a dying fire. "This," I continued, "is the valid will, certified, notarized, signed 3 months before his death." The silence was absolute. Then came the storm, Julian leaping to his feet, shouting about manipulation. Jessica snapping about undue influence. Leo stammering that Dad would never betray them. Megan hissing about family drama. Their words tangled together, a chorus of disbelief and entitlement. but Mr. Albright's voice cut through like a gavel. "This document supersedes all previous wills. Mrs. Eleanor is the sole heir." I sat very still, as though stillness itself were a crown. Inside, my heart pounded, not from triumph, but from the weight of finality. My son's eyes, once the joy of my life, now stared at me as if I had stolen something from them, when all I had done was hold onto what was rightfully mine. That moment did not bring relief. It brought clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is colder than grief. There is a strange heaviness that fills a room once the truth is spoken. It doesn't sound like thunder or crashing waves. It hums, low and constant, like an old refrigerator in the corner of a silent kitchen. That was the sound I felt in Mr. Albright's office after he announced that the only valid will left everything to me. My sons could not accept silence. Julian broke it first. His chair scraped the floor as he stood, fists clenched, his face red in blotches. "This is impossible," he barked, like a child being told Christmas had been canceled. "Dad would never cut us out. Mom, you manipulated him. You fed him lies when he was weak." Jessica's voice rose to join his. "This is fraud. You took advantage of a dying man." Her words were sharp but hollow, as if even she didn't quite believe them. What she believed in was the fortune she thought had been promised. Leo stayed seated but leaned forward, his knuckles white on the edge of the table. He didn't raise his voice, but his quiet tone was almost more chilling. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You can't handle this kind of money. You're 70 years old. Do you really want to be the kind of woman who wastes it all while your family struggles?" There it was. The wound carved open, plain for anyone to see. They didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as a bank. I could feel the tears pressing at the edges of my eyes, but I held them back. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I whispered a single sentence, so soft the lawyer had to lean closer to hear it. "Is that what you think of me? That I'm finished? That my life is already over?" For a brief moment, the room stilled again. Even Jessica's lips parted in something close to discomfort. But then Megan rolled her eyes, just a small movement, enough to snap me back. "Family drama doesn't belong in a lawyer's office," she muttered. I almost laughed. Drama. Was that what she thought grief was? A show? The love of my life gone, the father of my children in the ground, and my sons treating me like an obstacle to their payday. That wasn't drama, that was devastation. It was then that Mr. Albright cleared his throat and reached into the folder. "There's more," he said. His hands, steady despite years, held an envelope addressed in a handwriting I knew better than my own. My husband's. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The sight of his letters, angled, deliberate, the ink pressed hard as if each word had weight, nearly undid me. "This is a personal letter," the lawyer explained gently, and a statement of his reasons for this decision. Julian lunged forward, trying to grab it. "If it's about the family, we deserve to hear it." I pulled it back to my chest. "No," I said firmly. "This letter is for me. Your father was very clear." I broke the seal slowly, as if the paper might crumble if I rushed. Inside was my husband's voice, resurrected for one last conversation. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means our sons have shown their true nature." My throat tightened. I read silently at first, the words pulling me through memories I wished I could ignore. He had seen their contempt, their condescension, the way they spoke to me as though I were a burden. "I cannot leave them this inheritance, Elle. They will only use it to fuel their greed. You are the one who deserves my trust." Jessica slammed her hand on the table. "Read it out loud. If you're disinheriting us, we deserve to know why." I looked at her, then at my sons, then back at the page. My husband had written it for me, but maybe it was meant for them too, for them to hear the echo of the man they'd already lost. I read the letter aloud, each word landing like a stone in water, rippling across the room. Julian shouted, "This is manipulation." Dad wasn't in his right mind. But I remembered his eyes, clear as glass, days before he died. He had been more lucid than either of them, more awake to the truth than I had allowed myself to be. When I finished, I folded the paper gently and tucked it into my purse. That letter was not theirs to touch again. It was my anchor, my reminder that the man who had known me best believed in me even when our sons did not. The lawyer shifted the papers again. There is one final provision. If either son contests this will, they forfeit the small monthly allowance your husband left them, $500 each for 2 years on the condition that they treat their mother with respect. The room cracked open with disbelief. Jessica laughed, a desperate, brittle laugh. $500, after all these years. You are worth exactly what you've shown yourselves to be worth, I said softly. The words didn't come from anger. They came from a clarity I hadn't known I was capable of. For years, I had begged for their love, their attention, their kindness. Now I understood. Love cannot be begged. It can only be offered, and it can only be real if it comes without the price tag of inheritance. In that moment, I did not feel like the victim of betrayal. I felt like a woman standing, for the first time in decades, on her own ground. The days that followed the will reading carried a strange mixture of grief and liberation. It is one thing to bury a husband. It is another to bury illusions about your own children. I wandered through my house, the rooms echoing with absence, not just of him, but of the family I thought I still had. The pictures on the mantelpiece, once proud relics of birthdays and graduations, now felt like evidence in a trial I had been too blind to prosecute. Julian called once. His voice was clipped, rehearsed, the way a manager speaks to an employee he intends to fire. "Do you need anything, Mom?" he asked. The words were correct, but the tone betrayed him. He was checking a box, fulfilling a social duty, not reaching for me. It stung, not because of what he said, but because of what he withheld. Warmth. Leo didn't call at all. Silence, I learned, can be louder than anger. Megan, his wife, posted cheerful family pictures online within days. Smiles so bright they seemed to mock the hollow ache inside me. Jessica went further, sending me a message that said, "We hope you don't let this inheritance ruin the family. We're still here if you need guidance." Guidance. As though I were a child, as though my 70 years on this earth had taught me nothing about survival. In the evenings, when the shadows stretched across the living room, I could hear my husband's voice again, not in some mystical way, just memory replaying itself. "Our sons have changed, Elle. They are no longer the boys we raised." I would sit at the table where he had once placed the folder, his hands shaking not from weakness but from resolve, and I would whisper into the empty room, "You were right. I didn't want to believe you, but you were right." A week after the funeral, I received the official invitation from the lawyer for the reading of the will. My heart thudded as I unfolded the letter, though I already knew what was coming. It wasn't just about money. It was about truth. About finally forcing my sons to see themselves through the eyes of the man who had loved them without blindness. That morning, I prepared myself carefully. I didn't want to look rich. I didn't want to look pitiful. I wanted to look dignified. I pulled the black suit from my closet, the same one I had worn decades ago when I first met my husband's parents, nervous and hopeful. I fastened the pearl earrings he had given me on our 20th anniversary. They weren't extravagant, but they carried history, and history is a kind of armor. When I arrived at the law office 5 minutes early, they were already there. Julian and Jessica sat side by side, their laughter too sharp, the way people laugh when they are celebrating too soon. Leo scrolled his phone while Megan whispered in his ear. They looked up at me as though I were a trespasser, not their mother. Jessica's eyes flicked over my suit, her expression one of disdain thinly veiled as indifference. Megan didn't bother with pretense. She kept her gaze on her phone, her silence a calculated insult. I took the seat farthest from them. The air was thick with expectation, heavy enough to press against my lungs. When Mr. Albright entered, his presence shifted the atmosphere, like a priest stepping into a confessional. His eyes softened when they met mine, and in that look I felt the quiet promise of an ally. Before he could begin, Julian raised his hand. "I just want to make something clear," he said, his voice edged with arrogance. "This meeting is for the heirs of my father's estate. Mom, you can stay if you want, but this doesn't really concern you." He smiled as he spoke, but it wasn't kindness. It was the kind of smile men wear when they believe the verdict is already theirs. Leo nodded, his lips curling into a half-smirk. Jessica and Megan exchanged glances, satisfied, victorious before the battle had even begun. It was in that instant I knew my husband had been right about everything. The love I had believed unshakable was gone, replaced by ambition and entitlement. They were no longer my boys. They were men who saw their mother as an obstacle to wealth. I felt my body steady, like a tree in a storm finally rooting deeper instead of swaying. I reached into my purse, drew out the folder, and placed it gently on the table. The sound was small, but in that charged room it was louder than thunder. My sons didn't notice. They were too busy calculating futures that no longer belonged to them. As the lawyer unfolded the papers, I folded my hands in my lap, my heart beating a rhythm that felt like both an ending and a beginning. The lawyer's voice was calm, practiced, the kind of tone that has carried countless families through the storm of inheritance. Yet every syllable landed with the weight of judgment. "I, being of sound mind," he began, reading from the envelope Julian had proudly provided, "leave all my assets to my sons, Julian and Leo, in equal parts." It was the script they had been waiting for. Jessica squeezed Julian's hand so tightly her knuckles blanched, and Megan exhaled a little laugh of relief, her eyes darting to Leo as if to say, "It's ours. We've won." Julian leaned back, smug, his expression that of a man rehearsing how he would tell his friends about the estate he had earned. Leo crossed his legs with satisfaction, as if the wealth had already settled in his pocket. But I, sitting at the far end of the table, my hands folded around the purse that held the truth, felt nothing. No fear, no envy, only a strange patience, the kind you learn after decades of motherhood, waiting for your children to recognize the obvious. "Excuse me, Mr. Albright," I said softly but firmly. My voice carried enough weight to still their celebration. Every eye turned toward me. "That is not my husband's valid will." The air in the room shifted. Julian straightened abruptly. "What are you talking about, Mom? Dad showed us this himself." I slid the folder across the polished wood. "He showed you what he wanted you to see." The lawyer paused. His hand hovered for a moment before he opened it, his face betraying nothing except a flicker of recognition. He had seen these documents before. He knew. As he began to read, the color drained from my sons' faces. "I hereby leave the entirety of my estate, house, accounts, investments, life insurance, to my wife, Eleanor." Jessica gasped, her lips parting in disbelief. "This is a scam," she snapped, her voice trembling with both rage and panic. "A woman her age can't manage that much money. She'll squander it. She'll let strangers take advantage of her." Her words landed like a slap, not because of their cruelty, but because they echoed what society too often whispers about women who grow old. That wisdom fades when hair turns silver. "A scam," I repeated slowly, rising to my feet. My knees shook, but my voice did not. "You want to talk about scams? You begged your father for loans you never paid back. You used money meant for family emergencies to vacation in Europe while I ate canned soup to make ends meet. And now you call me incapable." Leo flushed, his silence louder than any denial. The lawyer cleared his throat. "This document is certified and dated after the other. Legally, it nullifies all previous provisions." He glanced at my sons with quiet finality. Your father was of sound mind when he signed it. Julian slammed his fist on the table. The sound startled even him. This isn't fair. We're his sons. We have families. We deserve support. I turned to him, my voice steady, but heavy with decades of unspoken truths. And what do I deserve, Julian? After raising you, sacrificing for you, giving up pieces of myself so you could build lives of your own, what do I deserve? To be cast aside at your father's funeral, to be treated as if 45 years of marriage made me a stranger. The words hung in the air like smoke, filling every corner of that office. The lawyer, gently but firmly, continued. There is also a personal letter from your father addressed to Mrs. Eleanor, and a stipulation: if either of you attempts to contest this will or questions your mother's capacity to manage her inheritance, you will forfeit the small allowance he has left you. Allowance? Megan asked sharply, hope flickering in her eyes. $500 a month for 2 years, the lawyer said. The silence that followed was not silent at all. It was filled with the sound of pride collapsing, of greed confronted by consequence. Jessica laughed then, but it was a desperate, cracked laugh. $500, after a lifetime, that's what he thought of us. No, I said. That's what you proved yourselves to be worth. For the first time since his death, I felt my husband beside me. Not in body, but in resolve. He had left me not just the estate, but a gift far rarer, the truth, written in ink that could not be erased. And I, at last, was ready to stand in it. The lawyer's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the sealed envelope. He held it as though it were something fragile, an artifact of memory rather than just paper and ink. My breath caught. I knew what it was before he spoke. Your husband left you a personal letter, Mrs. Eleanor. He asked that it be given to you at this time. The sight of my name in his handwriting nearly undid me. The slant of each letter was so familiar, I could hear his voice as though he were whispering over my shoulder. My fingers shook as I opened it, but the first line steadied me. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means our sons have shown their true nature. The room went still. Julian leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Read it aloud, he demanded. If it involves us, we have a right to hear it. This letter is mine, I said firmly, pressing the paper to my chest. Your father was clear about that. Jessica let out a scoff, high-pitched and mocking. Of course you'll keep it to yourself, because you've twisted him against us. We deserve to know what he thought. The lawyer gave me a small nod, one that carried the weight of both choice and consequence. My husband had written the words for me, but maybe they were meant for them too. Maybe this was his final chance to be their father, even in disappointment. I unfolded the letter again and began to read. For months, I have watched the way you treat your mother, with contempt, with impatience, with words sharpened not by honesty but by greed. Julian, you speak to her as though she were the housekeeper, not the woman who raised you. Leo, you dismiss her thoughts as if her years mean nothing, and your wives treat her as a nuisance to be endured. I cannot allow the woman who gave her life to this family to be cast aside. Julian slapped the table. That's not true. We respect her. But even he didn't sound convinced. I continued, ignoring his protest. I leave everything to your mother not to punish you, but to protect her. You have forgotten the values we taught you, the sacrifices she made for you. This is my final act as your father, to remind you what love looks like and what it does not. The words seemed to echo inside the walls of the office. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from the gravity of carrying his voice, his truth, into the world after he was gone. Jessica's face hardened. This is manipulation. He was sick. He didn't know what he was writing. He was lucid, I said, my voice sharper now. 3 days before he died, he told me he wanted me to read this in front of you in case you ever dared to question him. He saw what I refused to see. He saw who you had become. Leo's mouth opened, then closed. His silence was louder than Jessica's shrill accusations. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not vengeance, something steadier, dignity. I folded the letter and slipped it back into my purse. It was mine now, a shield, a reminder that even in death my husband had not abandoned me. Mr. Albright cleared his throat. There is one more stipulation, he said carefully. If either of you attempts to contest this will or undermine your mother's capacity, you forfeit the allowance left to you. Allowance? Megan leaned forward, hungry for details. $500 a month for 2 years, the lawyer said. The room froze. Julian's face turned crimson, Jessica's laughter cracked like glass, and Leo looked down at his hands as though they had betrayed him. You are worth exactly what you've chosen to be worth, I told them, and for the first time in decades, I no longer felt like I was begging to be seen. I was standing, finally standing. There is a particular kind of silence that follows when greed is exposed. It is not peaceful. It is brittle, like glass stretched too thin. That silence filled the lawyer's office after Mr. Albright confirmed the truth. My husband's last will left everything to me, and any challenge would strip my sons of even the small monthly allowance he had permitted. Julian was the first to shatter it. He surged forward, his fists pressing into the table as though force alone could rewrite legal documents. This isn't fair, he spat. We're his blood. We built our lives counting on him. You can't just erase us. I looked at him, my eldest, the boy who once brought me wildflowers clutched in sticky hands after a summer rain. Erase you, I whispered. I carried you inside me. I never erased you. You erased me when you treated me like a burden instead of your mother. The words seemed to stop him, but only for a moment. He shook his head violently, refusing to let them in. Jessica stood then, her voice trembling with a rage sharpened by fear. You'll waste it. You'll fall for scams. You'll give it all away. This family will be ruined because of you. I turned to face her, my voice quiet but cutting. You speak as if I've done nothing my whole life. I managed this household when your husband was still a boy. I stretched every dollar when his father lost his job. I kept food on the table when there was barely enough. If I could survive that, I think I can survive a bank account. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. He knew this was no longer about documents, it was about dignity. Then Leo finally spoke, his voice low, almost pleading. Mom, let's be reasonable. You've already lived your life. We have families, children, futures to secure. Don't take this from us. The words struck deeper than any shout could. You've already lived your life. As though my years, my breath, my very being had expired like milk in the fridge. My throat tightened, but I swallowed the ache. So I'm finished. Is that what you think? That I should step aside because I've already had enough? Leo shifted in his chair, unable to meet my gaze. His silence was confession. Jessica, sensing his falter, tried a different tactic. She softened her voice, painting sweetness over greed. Eleanor, no one is saying you're useless. But handling such wealth is complicated. We can help you. We'll manage it for you. Her smile was polished, her tone rehearsed, but her eyes betrayed her, bright with hunger, sharp with calculation. I remembered the money I had once lent them, the promises to repay, the excuses that followed. I remembered the photographs of their vacation in Paris while I counted pennies at home. Help me, I asked, almost laughing. The way you helped when I lent you thousands and ate soup from a can while you toured Europe. That kind of help. Jessica's face reddened. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The lawyer cleared his throat again, his way of restoring order. Mrs. Eleanor, perhaps we should continue with the formal reading. I nodded and sat back down, though my heart was still pounding. I wiped away a tear that had escaped without my permission. My sons remained standing as if sitting would mean surrender. And maybe it would. They weren't just losing money that day. They were losing the illusion that love could be twisted into entitlement. That respect could be replaced with demands. For the first time in years, I felt taller than the weight of their contempt. When Mr. Albright resumed the reading, his voice was calm, but the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. He outlined the transfer of accounts, the legal steps, the signatures still required. Each word seemed to chip away at the fantasy my sons had built for themselves. Julian paced like a caged animal. "This isn't over," he muttered. "We'll get lawyers. We'll prove Dad wasn't in his right mind." I turned my head slowly, studying him the way I once studied his sleeping face as a child, searching for the boy I had known, but finding only a man I barely recognized. "Contest it, Julian," I said quietly. "But remember your father's warning. One challenge and you lose even the allowance he left you." Jessica's face paled. Her hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Julian, no, don't you see? 500 may not be much, but it's something. If we fight, we lose it all." Her panic was almost theatrical, but her fear was real. Money had been her compass for so long, she couldn't imagine a world without it pointing north. Leo, who had been silent until then, leaned forward, his voice softer, almost rehearsed. "Mommy, please. Maybe we went too far. Maybe we didn't treat you as well as we should have, but we're still family. Can't we start over?" "Start over?" I asked, the words tasting bitter. "Like when you called me a burden after your father lost his job. Like when you suggested I move into a nursing home so I wouldn't be in your way. Like when your wives told me my advice belonged to another generation." Each question hit them like stones. They flinched, not because they disagreed, but because they remembered. Megan, her voice tight with desperation, tried one last tactic. "This is ridiculous. You're old. Eleanor, you can't manage this alone. You'll be prey for scammers. You'll make bad investments. You need us." I stood, my hands braced on the table, and met her gaze. "Old, yes, but also a woman who worked for 40 years, who raised 2 sons, who cared for a sick husband, who kept this family alive when there was nothing left. If I could do all that, I can manage a bank account." For the first time, Megan had no reply. Mr. Albright closed the folder with deliberate finality. "That concludes the reading. Mrs. Eleanor will meet again tomorrow to sign the transfer papers. Within a week, everything will be in your name." The sound of the folder snapping shut was like a door closing. Final, irreversible. My sons looked at each other, desperation flickering between them. They had expected triumph, not loss. They had expected control, not consequence. And as they stood there, stripped of their illusions, I understood something. They weren't just angry. They were afraid of a future they couldn't control, afraid of a mother who no longer needed their approval, afraid of seeing themselves through the eyes of the man who had loved them and found them wanting. I rose slowly, smoothing the jacket of my suit. My knees trembled, but my spine stayed straight. I looked at them one last time before leaving the room. "You speak of family," I said quietly. "But family isn't a word you reach for when the money disappears. Family is proven in the quiet hours when love costs something. Remember that." I walked out of the office with my head held high. My steps were small, but they were mine. And for the first time in years, I no longer felt like a guest in my own life. The day after the will reading, I woke in a house that felt too large and far too empty. Sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors, catching the dust in the corners, illuminating silence in the hallways. For decades, these walls had carried the noise of life, children's laughter, slammed doors, muffled arguments, the steady hum of a man's presence. Now it was just me and the weight of a future I hadn't expected. Grief is a strange companion. It comes in waves, yes, but sometimes it simply sits across from you at the breakfast table, reminding you of everything you no longer have. That morning, I didn't just mourn my husband. I mourned the family I once believed in, the illusion that sons would always remain sons, that love alone could anchor loyalty. And yet, alongside the grief, something new began to take root: liberation. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I didn't need to justify how I spent money, what I wore, or where I went. I could decide fully, freely, without negotiation. The thought frightened me, but it thrilled me too. That week, I began the process of selling the house. By any measure, it was beautiful, large, immaculate, in an exclusive neighborhood. But to me, it had become a mausoleum. Every corner echoed with conversations that soured, glances that dismissed me, moments when I felt like an intruder in my own home. I knew I could never heal within those walls. While the real estate agent prepared the listing, I packed only what mattered. Photo albums, letters, the pearls my husband had given me, the books I'd promised myself I'd reread when there was time. At last, there was time. In the meantime, I checked into a hotel overlooking the ocean. It felt extravagant, almost reckless. A suite with floor-to-ceiling windows, crisp white linens, and the rhythm of waves to lull me to sleep. For decades, I had denied myself comfort so others could have more. Now, for the first time, I allowed myself to be cared for, not by a person, but by space, by beauty, by silence I had chosen. It was there in that hotel that the first call came. Julian. "Mom," he began, his voice brittle, "we saw the house is listed online. You can't be serious. That's the family home." "No," I corrected him gently. "It was my home, and your father left it to me. I can do with it whatever I choose." There was a long pause, then his voice cracked just slightly. "Where will you go? Are you moving far? How will we see you?" It almost made me laugh, the sudden urgency to see me when for years they had found every excuse not to visit. "I'll buy something smaller," I told him. "Something that's truly mine, a place where I can be happy." He didn't respond, but I could hear his breathing, quick, uneven, the sound of a man calculating not loss of love, but loss of money. Later that evening, Leo called. His tone was softer, smoother, practiced like a man who knew charm often bought what anger could not. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking. Maybe we didn't appreciate you enough. Maybe we should have treated you better. I'm sorry." The apology might have worked years ago, but I could hear the strategy behind it. It wasn't repentance. It was negotiation. "Leo," I replied, "you made me feel invisible in my own family. Now that there's money involved, maybe you're sorry, but forgiveness isn't currency to be traded." His breathing quickened the same way Julian's had. He didn't argue. He just sighed and muttered, "We don't want to lose you, Mom." But I no longer needed to be needed. I no longer had to accept love with conditions. In that hotel room, with the ocean stretching endlessly beyond the glass, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. And I knew this was only the beginning. The sale of the house happened faster than I expected. The market was strong, and within weeks a young family signed the papers, their eyes bright with the same hope I once carried when we first stepped through those doors decades ago. I handed them the keys without looking back. Some walls are too heavy with memory to keep standing inside them. With the money transferred into my name, the numbers on the bank statement startled me. My husband had been careful, more careful than I realized. Investments I barely knew about, savings he had quietly grown, accounts that turned years of sacrifice into security. It was more than enough to last me the rest of my life. More than enough to give me something I hadn't known in years. Freedom. That freedom carried me into a new home, a sunlit condo by the ocean. The rooms were smaller, but brighter. The balcony opened to endless waves, each one a reminder that life moves forward whether you permit it or not. Mornings began with coffee and gulls circling in the salt air. Afternoons stretched into quiet hours with books I'd long ignored. And for the first time in decades, I slept without listening for footsteps that might demand something of me. But my sons did not stay silent. The calls came like tides. Julian first, alternating between desperation and anger. "Mom, this can't be final. We're family. Families work things out." Then, only a day later, You can't really believe Dad wanted this. You pressured him. His voice cracked under the weight of entitlement dressed as grief. Leo's approach was different. He spoke softly, weaving apologies with calculated pauses. Maybe we were harsh. Maybe we didn't show our gratitude, but you're still our mother. We need you. His tone was honey, but I knew what lay beneath it. Honey attracts, but it also conceals the sting. Their wives joined the chorus. Jessica left voicemails dripping with false sympathy. We don't want you to feel alone, Eleanor. Let us help you manage everything. Megan tried another angle, guilt disguised as concern. Think of the grandchildren. Don't you want to be part of their future? Each message reminded me less of love and more of transactions. They weren't reaching for me. They were reaching for the fortune that no longer belonged to them. And then came the encounter I hadn't expected. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I decided to visit the new luxury shopping center near my condo. For years, shopping had been an errand of necessity. Bread, detergent, socks on sale. That day, it was indulgence. I wore a red dress I had bought the week before, the kind of dress I once would have deemed too much. The kind of dress a woman wears when she finally remembers her life is her own. I wandered past glittering storefronts until a pearl necklace in the jewelry display caught my eye. I stepped inside. The saleswoman greeted me with warmth, her smile professional yet kind, and soon I was trying on bracelets and earrings I had never allowed myself to touch. That's when I heard a voice. Familiar, sharp, bitter. Jessica. She was near the entrance, phone pressed to her ear, speaking loudly enough to turn heads. Can you believe it? $500 a month, that's all we get while she lives like a queen. Her dress was cheap imitation of elegance, her shoes worn, her purse frayed at the seams. My heart didn't race. Not this time. Instead, I felt an odd calm, the kind that comes when you realize the balance of power has shifted. The saleswoman asked if I wanted to purchase the bracelet I was admiring. I smiled. Yes, and the emerald earrings too. The sound of the card machine beep cut through Jessica's conversation. She turned, saw me, and her face changed. Surprise, then shame, then anger poorly concealed. She ended her call abruptly and walked toward me, her voice sweetened like poison in a cup of tea. Eleanor, she said, what a surprise. I lifted the small bag of jewelry. I was just buying myself some gifts, I replied. It's remarkable what a woman can do with her own money. Her smile faltered, her eyes darting to the bags, her calculations visible. For the first time, I realized something profound. They had lost not just an inheritance, they had lost control, and I, at long last, had gained my freedom. The jewelry store encounter with Jessica was only the beginning. A week later, fate placed all of them in my path. Julian, Leo, Jessica, and Megan, this time together. They had orchestrated it, of course. Jessica must have sent word the moment she saw me, because within half an hour the others appeared as if summoned. I was sipping coffee in the corner of a cafe upstairs, watching the ocean through glass windows when their shadows fell across my table. Julian led the way, his expression a careful mix of contrition and determination. Leo followed, Megan clutching his arm, Jessica hovering like an actress about to deliver her lines. Mom, Julian began, pulling out a chair without asking, we need to talk. I looked at the four of them and gestured toward the empty seats. Then sit. But understand something, this conversation isn't about convincing me to undo what your father already decided. Their faces shifted. Jessica was the first to speak, her tone syrupy. Eleanor, we've been reflecting. Grief makes people say terrible things. We weren't ourselves. We want to make things right. Her words floated across the table like perfume, sweet but suffocating. Make things right? I asked evenly. Tell me, Jessica, how do you plan to undo years of disdain? How do you erase pushing me away from my husband's coffin? She stiffened, her eyes flicking downward. Megan stepped in quickly, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. We all make mistakes, Eleanor, but family is forever. You can't just cut us out. Forever, I echoed. Where was that philosophy when you told me I was making a scene at my husband's funeral? Where was it when you dismissed my grief as drama? The cafe grew quieter. Other customers leaned ever so slightly, pretending not to listen, but I could feel their attention. Julian noticed too, shifting in his seat, his jaw tight. Public shame had never sat well with him. "Mom, please," Julian said, lowering his voice. "Let's not do this here. People are watching." I sipped my coffee slowly. They should watch. The world should see what greed does to a family. Maybe someone here will go home tonight and decide not to treat their mother the way you've treated me. Leo's face flushed. "We're not greedy. We expected fairness. You've had your life, Mom. We thought it was our turn." There it was again. You've had your life. As if love has an expiration date, as if dignity can be measured in years lived. I set my cup down gently. "Fairness." My voice cut through the air like glass breaking. "Fairness is not raising two sons alone when their father lost his job. Fairness is not working nights so you could both have college degrees. Fairness is not sacrificing every dream of my own so yours could flourish. Fairness, my sons, has been paid in full, and then some." Silence. Jessica glanced around nervously as a few customers openly turned toward us now. Megan's hand shook slightly as she stirred her untouched tea. Julian's knuckles whitened against the edge of the table. Leo's lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, Jessica whispered, "You're punishing us." I leaned forward, my voice calm, steady. "No, your father and I gave you everything we could. What you do with your lives now is your responsibility. I am no longer your safety net, your bank, or your excuse. I am simply your mother. Whether you choose to treat me as such, that is up to you." The weight of my words seemed to hang in the air long after I spoke them. Julian tried one last desperate move. He pulled out his phone and thrust it toward me, scrolling through pictures of my grandchildren. Children I hadn't seen in months, birthdays I hadn't been invited to. "Look, Mom, they miss you. Don't you want to be part of their lives?" I looked at the photographs carefully. The children smiled at cakes, at balloons, at moments I hadn't been asked to share. My chest tightened, but I did not let it show. "I want to be part of their lives," I said softly, "but not on the condition that I buy my way in." The truth landed between us like a gavel. For once, none of them had anything to say. And I, sitting in that cafe, with strangers watching and the sea stretching endlessly behind me, felt something I hadn't in years, unshakable. 6 months passed before I realized I had begun to smile without effort. Not the practiced smile of a mother trying to keep peace at the dinner table, not the brittle smile of a widow holding herself together, but a real smile, the kind that starts in the chest and lifts the face without permission. My condo by the sea had become a sanctuary. Mornings began on the terrace with the orange cat I'd adopted, whom I named Albright in honor of the lawyer who helped me reclaim my dignity. He sprawled across my lap while the ocean sang its endless hymn. Afternoons were for painting, my hands clumsy at first but steadier each day, as though color itself were teaching me how to live again. The video of my confrontation in the jewelry store had gone viral. I hadn't planned it, hadn't sought it, but when a young woman asked if she could share my story, I said yes. Millions watched. Messages flooded in, strangers who saw their own lives in mine, women who whispered thank you across digital pages, men who admitted they had overlooked their mother's sacrifices. My pain had become something larger than me, a mirror held up to families who had forgotten what love should mean. The consequences for my sons were swift. Julian lost his job when his employer declared they had no place for a man who mistreated his mother so publicly. Leo's business collapsed as clients withdrew, unwilling to trust someone whose greed had become a spectacle. Jessica and Megan found themselves isolated, their social circles shrinking, neighbors whispering when they walked past. What they had feared most, public shame, arrived at their doorsteps. They tried to contact me. Calls I ignored. Letters I returned unopened. Once they even sent a lawyer to contest the will, but as my husband had foreseen, that attempt cost them the small allowance they had left. For the first time in their lives, they were forced to stand on their own. I should have felt vindicated. And yes, part of me did. But beneath it was something softer, a sadness for what might have been, for the family dinners that would never come, for the grandchildren who knew me only through whispers. I mourned not only the loss of my husband, but also the loss of the family I had tried so hard to hold together. Still, in that morning I found a new mission. With part of my inheritance, I established a small foundation to help older women facing neglect and abuse from their families. We offered legal support, safe housing, and most importantly, reminders that their lives still carried value. Each story I heard from them was like an echo of my own, but together, those echoes became a chorus of strength. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I wrote in my journal, "I do not regret loving them. I only regret not understanding sooner that kindness should never be practiced at the cost of self-destruction." At 67, I finally learned what it meant to live for myself. Not in defiance, not in bitterness, but in peace. My husband had given me one last gift, the freedom to claim my dignity, to honor the years I still had, and to understand that self-respect is not selfishness, it is survival. I closed the journal, stroked Albright's fur, and looked out over the infinite horizon. For the first time in decades, the future belonged to me, and I was ready. D-letter-1-E-B-N-G. And so, that is the story of a woman who lost her husband, almost lost herself, but finally found freedom, dignity, and peace. A story not about money, but about what cannot be measured in numbers. Respect, a self-worth, and the courage to live for oneself, even when love is betrayed. If you have stayed with me until the very end, thank you. Stories like this only matter because they find a place in the hearts of those who listen. I hope this tale reminds you to treasure the people who stand by you without condition, and to protect your dignity no matter the cost. Take care of your health, hold your family close, and remember, love is proven in actions, not an inheritance. From my heart to yours, I wish you peace, strength, and a home filled with true affection. Thank you for watching, and may your days be blessed with both joy and compassion.